we hear the whip.
And yes, I can.
Mm-hmm.
And on the third step, he strikes, and he cuts open your buttocks.
In 1994, American Michael Fay pleaded guilty to vandalizing 18 cars in Singapore and was sentenced to 6 strokes of the cane. When the US president publicly asked that the 18-year-old be spared from the cane, Singapore refused. The caning and outcry are easy to remember, but the more interesting story is how Singapore won the argument.
Michael Fay is to be tied to a trestle and punished with a rattan cane. Each stroke splits the skin. After 3, victims may go into shock. His crime was to spray paint 18 cars and steal some road signs.
And a New York Times columnist wrote,
"Torture is a crime against humanity. How long can Singapore prosper as a lawless state?"
Fay's mother had some strong words, not for her son, but for Singapore.
This is horrendous torture. It's awful. It's wrong.
Fay's parents lobbied President Clinton, who asked that he not be caned.
He is going to bleed considerably and may have permanent scars, and I think it is a mistake.
24 US senators, representing a quarter of the US Senate, signed a letter asking for clemency. One of them even saw Singapore's founding father over the issue. The government declined to intervene, saying that the law applied equally to Singaporeans and foreigners.
If you don't cane the boy because he's American, and you cane the Indian or the Pakistani or the Bangladeshi, what kind of a government are you? What kind of a stand do you have? Are you saying that you're afraid of the Americans? Yes, we are, but not that afraid. We have to enforce our law.
While Lee Kuan Yew had stepped down as Prime Minister 3 years ago, he was still a towering figure. Then Prime Minister Goh Chok Tong also defended the law.
To be kind to the individual offender is to be cruel to the whole society and to him. We know from experience that strict punishments deter criminals. In particular, it deters those who have been punished from repeating the offense. One US TV crew who was here covering the Michael Fay case interviewed a man who had been caned for participating in a gang rape. He told them that the caning was so painful that he would never commit a crime again. In other words, the punishment worked.
Here's the key move. Instead of discussing, is the punishment cruel? Go discuss, whose rights are more important, the criminal or the country? He backed the arguments with stories that were emotionally persuasive, even if they weren't scientific proof. When such anecdotes were echoed elsewhere, including by a British prison commissioner who had overseen canings in colonial Singapore, they became very difficult to argue against in the court of public opinion. Goh also criticized Fay's parents.
Compare the attitudes of Michael Fay's parents and Siu Chi-ho's parents. Fay's parents were outraged, angry with the Singapore government, instead of being ashamed. They went on radio, TV, CNN, talk shows, blaming everyone but themselves. Siu's parents showed pain, avoided publicity, and considered leaving Singapore because of a sense of shame. In Confucian society, a child who goes wrong knows he has brought shame upon the whole family. In America, he may win instant stardom.
Goh shifts attention away from the punishment itself and onto the family's response. Once the debate became about responsibility rather than suffering, Singapore was arguing on safer terrain. Moreover, Goh frames it as a fight between Confucian values and American values. Instead of saying caning is good, he says your moral framework isn't universal. Were Singapore's arguments effective? In many ways, yes. While an opinion poll in early April showed that 38% approved of Fay's sentence and 52% disapproved, another poll later that month showed that 49% approved and 48% disapproved. Crucially, the Americans that supported Fay's sentence were just as passionate as those who disapproved, if not more. This is what they told Fay's parents to their faces.
I think he deserves it. If he did it, he should have to do the crime. It's just like here.
Should he be caned?
If he's in America and the law says no, then no. If he's in Singapore,
but
where
if
the
it's
law...
a good idea in Singapore, why isn't it a good idea here?
It's a different country. We have different laws.
The Singapore people, they make their laws. They live by them. The country's good.
Yes.
The United States people go to other countries. They think they're immune.
They also wrote in to register their views.
Yes, says one. People should be responsible for their actions. Let the vandal take his beating, says another.
Mike Royko, a columnist with the Chicago Tribune, reported receipt of a stack of letters several inches high, 99% of them in support of Singapore's sentence. This cannot be helping Fay, whose slim hope of escape from the cane now is last-minute clemency from the President of Singapore, Ong Teng Cheong.
President Ong reduced the number of strokes from 6 to 4. As a largely ceremonial head of state, the president's decision was based on advice from the government. Let's hear the government explain their decision.
So what do you do if the US president asks you for a small favor and you want to remain friends with the United States of America? If it's a matter of face and some face saving is necessary, well, maybe we can do something.
As Americans continued to express their views, those on Fay's side became increasingly frustrated, realizing they were fighting a losing battle. A US senator from Ohio, Fay's home state, realized that the battle was now with his own countrymen, and not Singapore.
Perhaps the most shocking aspect of the Fay case was not the punishment itself, but the reaction of average Americans. In poll after poll, Americans questioned about the Fay case responded that Fay was getting what he deserved. Some even said that caning or some type of corporal punishment ought to be introduced in American public schools.
A Washington Post editorial lamented.
Instead of Americans protesting the flogging of one of their own, they have let fear of crime prompt them to embrace barbarism.
Even President Clinton's advisors warned. Retaliating with trade sanctions would be a political and personal disaster because most American voters were backing Singapore. The shift in public opinion even showed up in popular culture. The Simpsons parodied the Michael Fay affair in a highly rated episode. But the punchline wasn't Singapore. Instead, the show mocked Fay's mother.
Oh, for the love of criminy, give me that. I know Bart did something wrong, but he's my son, and I'm going to punish him myself. Our countries may have their differences, but as human beings, I think we can all agree there's no substitute for the discipline of a loving parent. He wants to talk to you.
Yellow. So we're in agreement. She won't be allowed near the phone again.
Michael Fay was caned on the 5th of May. When he returned to the US, he gave many interviews.
I was bent over halfway. I mean, my back was bent in a 90-degree, and I was cuffed, buckled like this. And he's whipping it as he's going on each step. And
can you hear the whip?
And yes, I can. And on the third step, he strikes. And he cuts open your buttocks. And there's a lot of pain. There's a lot of pain.
Michael Fay was not the only stunned person. Other Asian diplomats were stunned as well. Years later, one of Singapore's top diplomats explained why.
Some Asian diplomats said to me, gee, if we had caught an American, And the American ambassador had come to us and said, let go of him. We would have quietly let him go. We wouldn't have put him in jail. You not only put him in jail, you caned him. So it was a way of actually demonstrating, in a sense, how fiercely independent Singapore was.
This was what the diplomats were scared of.
I myself had difficulty in making an appointment to see President Clinton in the first 2 years or so. The White House aide did not put the request on Singapore up to the president. so we just got to accept it.
Still, despite the tensions, the relationship recovered surprisingly quickly. 3 years later, Prime Minister Goh met President Clinton at an APEC conference in Vancouver. They played golf and kindled a relationship that allowed Goh to bypass White House gatekeepers. This led to the US-Singapore Free Trade Agreement, the first US trade deal with any Asian country. A year before the trade deal was signed, Clinton joked with Goh, "You should have caned Michael Fay more." Whether Michael Fay should have been caned is not for me to judge. But this story reveals one truth. Even when you're negotiating with the most powerful people in the world, you don't always need to give them what they want. If you can define the terms of the argument, political pressure becomes much harder to apply.
You must decide where your red line is. And if you don't want to be steamrolled, well, you just have quietly to stand your ground, and I'm sorry, we don't agree. You have your view, we have ours. But I hope, notwithstanding that, we will be able to continue to work together. So far, that has been a formula which has worked for us. I can't say that it will always work. At some point, the pressure may become overwhelming. But that's why we're all in favor of the United Nations and a rules-based global order.
Thanks for watching.